The morning shift at Galactic Prison Complex Delta 9 started like any other day. Officer Blake Rivers had been processing new inmates for 3 years, and the routine never changed. Scan the prisoner's blood, update their file, assign them a cell block. Simple. Boring. Safe. Today's batch included another human smuggler caught running illegal cargo through the outer systems. Nothing unusual about that. Humans made up 60% of the prison population, mostly small-time criminals trying to make a living in a galaxy that didn't make it easy for their species. The prisoner's name was David Carter, 28 years old, caught with a cargo hold full of rare crystals he couldn't afford to buy legally. His file showed the typical story: grew up poor on Earth Colony 7, dropped out of school, turned to crime when legitimate work didn't pay enough to feed his family. Blake had seen 1,000 just like him. "Place your hand on the scanner," Blake said without looking up from his data pad. The bioscanner was older than the prison itself, a piece of ancient technology that the previous galactic civilization had left behind. Nobody understood exactly how it worked, but it never failed to provide accurate genetic information. David pressed his palm against the smooth crystal surface. The device glowed its usual soft blue color, and Blake prepared to input the standard human genetic markers into the system. But something went wrong. The blue light suddenly blazed white, so bright that everyone in the processing room had to shield their eyes. The scanner's hum grew louder, almost musical, and then a voice filled the chamber, not through the speakers, but somehow emanating from the device itself. The voice spoke in a language Blake had never heard before, flowing and melodic. But his universal translator kicked in immediately, converting the alien words into perfect English. "Halt all proceedings immediately. Release this individual at once, Your Imperial Majesty. The rightful heir has returned to claim what was always his." Blake dropped his data pad. The other guards stopped what they were doing and stared. In the 300 years since these scanners had been discovered and put into use across the galaxy, nothing like this had ever happened. The ancient machines were purely functional. They analyzed DNA and provided data. They didn't speak. They certainly didn't give orders. David pulled his hand back from the scanner, looking as confused as everyone else. "What just happened?" he asked. Before Blake could answer, Warden Thex entered the room, his forearms moving in agitation. The insectoid alien had run this prison for 15 years and prided himself on maintaining perfect order. The expression on his compound eyes showed this was definitely not part of his orderly routine. "Explain this disruption immediately," Thex demanded, his translator giving his chittering voice a sharp edge. Blake gestured helplessly at the scanner. "Sir, the machine just talked. It called the prisoner Your Imperial Majesty, and ordered us to release him." Thex's antenna twitched, a sign he was either thinking hard or getting angry. Probably both. "Run the scan again. These devices malfunction perhaps once in a millennium, but they do malfunction." David placed his hand on the scanner a second time. The same brilliant white light filled the room, and the voice returned, even more insistent than before. "Do not test the patience of your emperor. The blood of the First Dynasty flows in his veins. Release him now or face the consequences of defying the rightful ruler of the galaxy." This time the scanner didn't just speak, it began projecting images into the air above its surface. Holographic displays showed star maps, ancient symbols, and what looked like DNA sequences that made Blake's head hurt to look at. The complexity was beyond anything human science could produce. Dr. Lisa Park, the prison's human medical officer, pushed through the crowd of guards that had gathered. She stared at the floating displays with the trained eye of someone who understood genetics. "Those DNA markers," she whispered. "They're not just human. They're enhanced somehow. Patterns I've never seen before, but the base sequence." She turned to look at David with new interest. "Where are you from? What do you know about your family history?" David shrugged. "Nothing special. My parents died when I was young. Grew up in the colony orphanages. Never knew much about where my family came from originally." The scanner's voice returned, softer now but still carrying absolute authority. "The heir has been found. The time of exile ends now. Prepare for the return of the human empire." Blake felt a chill run down his spine. Every schoolchild in the galaxy learned about the first human empire, the mysterious civilization that had controlled half the known galaxy before vanishing without explanation 2,000 years ago. They'd left behind incredible technology and empty worlds, but no trace of what had happened to them. Now their ancient machines were claiming that this small-time smuggler was somehow connected to that lost empire. Blake looked at David Carter and wondered if he was looking at the most dangerous man in the galaxy, or just the unluckiest. Dr. Lisa Park had never seen blood work like this before. She'd been studying human genetics for 15 years, but David Carter's blood sample was showing results that shouldn't be possible. Under the microscope, his cells looked different, stronger, more organized, like they'd been designed rather than evolved. "This is incredible," she muttered, adjusting the scanner settings for the 10th time. "Your red blood cells carry 30% more oxygen than normal humans. Your neural pathways show activity in brain regions that are completely dormant in everyone else I've ever tested." David sat on the examination table in the prison medical bay, still wearing his orange jumpsuit. He felt normal, looked normal, but apparently he was anything but normal. "What does that mean exactly? Am I sick or something?" Lisa shook her head, pulling up holographic displays that showed his DNA structure. "Sick? No, you're the opposite of sick. Your genetic code has sequences I've only seen in theoretical research about human enhancement. It's like someone took regular human DNA and upgraded it." The medical bay door slid open and Warden Thex entered, followed by 2 guards. His compound eyes fixed on the genetic displays floating above Lisa's workstation. "What have you discovered, Doctor?" Thex asked. "Sir, this prisoner's bloodline contains markers that match archived genetic samples from the first human empire. Not similar markers, exact matches. According to this data, he's a direct descendant of the imperial family that ruled the galaxy 2,000 years ago." Thex's antennae twitched rapidly. "That's impossible. The imperial bloodline was wiped out when their empire fell." "That's what everyone believed," Lisa said, highlighting specific gene sequences on her display. "But look at this. These enhanced genetic traits don't just appear randomly. They're inherited, passed down through generations. David's ancestors weren't just part of the empire, they were at the very top of it." David laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Come on, document. I grew up in the slums of Colony 7. My mom cleaned floors for a living before she died. We're nobody special." "Maybe that's what your family wanted people to think," Lisa said quietly. "Maybe that's how they survived when the empire fell." Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the prison. Red lights flashed, and the automated voice of the prison's computer system announced, "Incoming priority transmission from Galactic Command. All senior staff report to communications immediately." Thex cursed in his native language and hurried out, leaving David alone with Dr. Park. She continued working at her station, but David could see her hands shaking slightly as she typed. "You're scared?" he said. "Terrified," she admitted. "Do you know what happened the last time someone claimed to be from the Imperial bloodline? The Hegemony Council sent a fleet to glass the entire star system. They don't take chances when it comes to humans trying to reclaim old territory." David felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. "But I never claimed anything. I don't want to rule anybody. I just want to serve my sentence and get back to my life." Lisa turned to face him, her expression serious. "I don't think you get to choose anymore. Word of what happened in processing is already spreading. The quantum communication network picked it up an hour ago. By now, every government in the galaxy knows that an ancient predecessor scanner has identified you as the lost heir to the human empire." The medical bay door opened again, but this time it wasn't Thex. A tall man in civilian clothes walked in, moving with the easy confidence of someone comfortable with violence. He had the weathered look of a spacer, with old scars on his hands and the kind of tan that came from working under different suns. "Dr. Park," the man said politely, "I need you to step away from the prisoner." "Who are you?" Lisa demanded. "How did you get past security?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Security had to take an unexpected nap. My name is Tyler Brooks and I'm here to collect what belongs to us." David stood up from the examination table. "I don't belong to anybody." "Oh, but you do," Tyler said. "You belong to humanity. And humanity has been waiting a very long time for you to come home." As if summoned by his words, more figures appeared in the doorway. Men and women dressed in dark clothing, carrying weapons David recognized as military grade. They moved like soldiers, but their equipment wasn't from any regular army David knew about. "The Imperial remnant has been hidden in the Outer Rim for 2,000 years, Tyler continued. "Waiting, watching, preserving the old ways. We always knew one day the blood would call to blood, and the true heir would reveal himself." Dr. Park backed against her workstation. "You can't just take him. This is a secured facility." Tyler gestured to his companions. "Doctor, respectfully, your security measures were designed to keep people in, not to keep us out. We've been planning this extraction for longer than your prison has existed." David felt something stirring inside him, a strange certainty he'd never experienced before. Looking at these people, he somehow knew they were telling the truth. More than that, he felt connected to them in a way he couldn't explain. The Empire fell for a reason, David said. Maybe it should stay fallen. Tyler's expression grew serious. Maybe. But with the Hegemony Council preparing to eliminate every human colony in the galaxy, staying hidden isn't an option anymore. Like it or not, your people need their emperor. The explosion that rocked the prison's east wing came at 3 in the morning, when most of the guards were half asleep and the night shift was running on cheap coffee and boredom. David jolted awake in his cell as the lights flickered and emergency sirens began wailing throughout the complex. Through his small window, he could see flashes of laser fire lighting up the darkness outside. Ships were landing in the prison yard, sleek, predatory vessels that didn't match any design he recognized from the regular galactic fleets. These looked older, more dangerous, like they'd been built for war rather than peacekeeping. All prisoners remain in your cells, the automated voice announced over the intercom system. This facility is under lockdown. Any prisoner found outside their designated area will be terminated. But David's cell door was already sliding open. The electronic locks had somehow been overridden, and he could hear similar sounds echoing throughout his cell block. Other prisoners were shouting, some celebrating their apparent freedom, others smart enough to realize this wasn't a regular jailbreak. Tyler Brooks appeared in his doorway, now wearing tactical gear and carrying a rifle that hummed with barely contained energy. "Time to go, Your Majesty. Our window is closing fast." "Don't call me that," David said, but he followed Tyler out into the corridor anyway. The alternative was staying in a prison that was rapidly turning into a war zone. "The Hegemony Council worked faster than we expected," Tyler explained as they moved through the chaos. "They've put a bounty on your head that's big enough to buy a small moon. Half the galaxy's bounty hunters are already on their way here." They reached a junction where several corridors met, and David saw the true scale of what was happening. Tyler's people were everywhere, moving with military precision through the prison complex. They weren't just rescuing him, they were fighting a full-scale battle against the prison guards and what looked like Hegemony special forces. "How many of you are there?" David asked, ducking as laser fire sizzled over their heads. "More than you might think, fewer than we need," Tyler replied, returning fire with practiced accuracy. "The Imperial remnant has been scattered across the galaxy for 2 millennia, but we've been preparing for this day. Every human colony, every space station, every mining operation, we've had people there waiting." They rounded another corner and came face to face with Warden Thex, who was holding a heavy plasma rifle and looked absolutely furious. His compound eyes focused on David with unmistakable hatred. "You will not leave this facility alive," Thex snarled, his voice distorted by rage. "The Hegemony has promised to make me governor of this entire system if I deliver your corpse to them." Tyler raised his weapon, but David surprised himself by stepping forward instead of back. "Wait," he said, and something in his voice made everyone freeze. Looking at Warden Thex, David felt that strange certainty rising in him again. It was like a voice in the back of his mind, whispering knowledge he'd never learned. "You're not going to shoot me, Warden. You're going to step aside and let us pass." Thex laughed, a harsh chittering sound. "And why would I do that, human?" David walked closer, ignoring the weapon pointed at his chest. "Because deep down you know exactly what I am. Your species served the first human empire for 600 years. You were bred to recognize imperial authority when you see it." Something changed in Thex's compound eyes. His grip on the rifle wavered, and David could see confusion replacing the anger on his alien features. "That empire is gone," Thex whispered, but his voice had lost its certainty. "No," David said quietly. "It's not." The rifle clattered to the floor as Thex's hands began to shake. Without another word, the alien warden stepped aside, pressing himself against the wall as if he couldn't get far enough away from David. Tyler stared at David with newfound respect. That was impossible. The genetic conditioning programs were destroyed 2,000 years ago. "Apparently not all of them," David replied, though he was as surprised as anyone by what had just happened. They reached the prison's main exit, where more of Tyler's people were waiting with a transport ship. But as they stepped outside, David realized their problems were just beginning. The sky was full of ships now, not just the Imperial remnant vessels but dozens of others. Bounty hunters, mercenaries, and what looked like an entire Hegemony battle group approaching from the outer system. "Everyone wants you," Tyler said, pushing David toward their ship. "Some want to use you, others want to kill you, but none of them want to leave you alone." As their transport lifted off, David watched the prison complex disappear beneath them. Already, other ships were moving to intercept their course. The hunt had begun and he was the prize everyone was after. "Where are we going?" David asked. Tyler smiled grimly as their ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving their pursuers behind for now. "Home," he said. "To a place the Empire never really fell. Where your people have been waiting for their emperor to return and remind the galaxy why humans used to rule the stars." David looked out at the swirling colors of hyperspace and wondered if he was ready for what was coming. Ready or not, there was no turning back now. The hidden world of Haven existed in a place that shouldn't have been possible. Tucked inside a nebula that scrambled sensors and made hyperspace navigation nearly impossible, the planet was invisible to anyone who didn't already know exactly where to look. As their ship dropped out of hyperspace, David stared in amazement at what he saw. Massive space stations orbited the hidden world, their designs clearly based on ancient Imperial technology but upgraded with modern improvements. Sleek warships patrolled the system's edges, and David could see construction yards where new vessels were being built. This wasn't just a hideout, it was the heart of a civilization that had been growing in secret for 2,000 years. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," Tyler said as their transport approached the main station. "This is Command Central, headquarters of the Imperial Remnant Fleet." Admiral Rachel Stone met them at the docking bay, and David immediately understood why she was in charge. She carried herself with the kind of authority that made people step aside without being asked. Her gray hair was pulled back in a military style, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who'd spent decades planning for this moment. "So you're the one the scanners have been waiting for," she said, looking David up and down with obvious skepticism. "You don't look like much." "I keep hearing that," David replied. "Maybe that's the point." Stone smiled for the first time since he'd met her. "Good answer. Come with me. You have a lot to learn and not much time to learn it." The command center was unlike anything David had ever seen. Holographic displays showed star maps covering the entire galaxy, with thousands of markers indicating Imperial Remnant assets, human colonies and enemy positions. Hundreds of people worked at stations throughout the massive chamber, coordinating operations across dozens of star systems. "We've been preparing for this day since the Empire fell," Stone explained as they walked through the controlled chaos. "When our ancestors realized they couldn't win against the alliance that rose against them, they made a choice. Instead of fighting to the bitter end, they scattered. Hid their technology, their people, their plans for the future." David watched as technicians updated threat assessments on nearby displays. What happened to the original empire? Why did it fall? Stone's expression grew somber. Power corrupts even when it starts with good intentions. The first emperors united humanity and brought peace to the galaxy. But their descendants became cruel, treating other species like slaves. Eventually, those species had enough and formed the coalition that destroyed us. They entered a smaller chamber where David saw something that made his breath catch. Ancient armor stood in a display case, clearly designed for someone his exact size. The metal gleamed with an inner light, and strange symbols covered its surface. "This belonged to the last true emperor," Stone said. "Emperor Alexander Kane, who died defending Earth during the final battle. He ordered the evacuation before the planet fell, saving millions of lives even as his empire crumbled around him." David approached the armor, feeling that strange pull in his mind again. When his fingers touched the metal, the symbols began to glow, responding to his genetic signature like the prison scanner had. "The armor chooses its wearer," Stone said quietly. "It's been waiting for someone worthy to claim it." Over the following days, David's education began in earnest. Military tacticians taught him strategy, while historians explained the complex politics of the modern galaxy. He learned that the Hegemony Council wasn't just another government, it was a coalition of alien species united by their fear and hatred of humanity. "They've been systematically weakening human colonies for decades," explained Commander James Park, the station's intelligence chief. "Higher taxes, restricted trade routes, impossible regulations. They want to drive humanity to extinction without openly declaring war." But David also learned that not all humans were ready to unite behind him. Many colonial governments viewed the Imperial Remnant as dangerous extremists, preferring to work within the existing system rather than risk another galactic war. "Governor Lisa Chen of New California has publicly denounced you as a pretender," Park reported during one briefing. "She says humanity doesn't need an emperor, and that any attempt to restore the empire will only bring destruction to human worlds." David felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Every decision he made could affect billions of lives across the galaxy. The training sessions grew more intense as his instructors pushed him to master skills he'd never needed as a smuggler. The weapons training was the most surprising part. Ancient Imperial firearms responded to his touch like living things, their targeting systems syncing with his enhanced neural pathways. He found himself moving in combat scenarios with reflexes he didn't know he possessed. Your genetics aren't just about royal bloodlines, Stone explained after watching him disassemble a squad of training robots in record time. The Imperial family was engineered to be superior soldiers, leaders, and tacticians. You're accessing abilities that have been dormant in your bloodline for generations. But even as David grew stronger and more confident, the situation in the galaxy continued to deteriorate. Reports came in daily of human colonies being attacked by pirates, using advanced alien technology. The Hegemony Council claimed they were doing everything possible to stop the attacks, but their response was always too little, too late. "They're testing our resolve," Stone said during an emergency staff meeting. "Pushing to see how much they can get away with before we respond." David studied the tactical displays showing burning human worlds and felt anger building inside him like a storm. "How long before they stop pretending this isn't genocide?" "Not long," Stone replied grimly. "Our scouts report massive fleet buildups in key hegemony systems. They're preparing for something big." That night, alone in his quarters, David stared out at the stars and made the decision that would change everything. He wasn't just David Carter anymore, smuggler from the wrong side of nowhere. Whether he liked it or not, he was becoming something else. Something the galaxy would have to reckon with. The storm was gathering and he intended to be ready for it. The attack on Haven came without warning, just as Admiral Stone had predicted. David was in the middle of a strategy session when the alarms began screaming throughout the station. Through the command center's massive viewports, he could see the impossible, a hegemony fleet of over 300 ships dropping out of hyperspace, supported by vessels from human colonial governments that had refused to acknowledge his claim. "How did they find us?" Tyler shouted over the chaos as technicians scrambled to coordinate the defense. "Someone sold us out," Stone replied grimly, her fingers flying over tactical displays. "Doesn't matter now. All Imperial vessels, this is Admiral Stone. Defend Haven at all costs." David watched in horror as the first wave of enemy missiles slammed into the outer defense platforms. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers in the darkness of space, each one representing dozens of lives lost. The Imperial remnant fleet moved to intercept, but they were outnumbered 3-1. "The ancient dreadnoughts," David said suddenly. "In the archives, you showed me ships that have been in storage for centuries. Why aren't we using them?" Stone's expression was pained. "Because they only respond to someone with the proper genetic authorization. We've been trying to activate them for decades, but the command codes are locked to the Imperial bloodline." David felt that familiar certainty rising in his chest. "Take me to them. Now." The journey to the hidden shipyards took precious minutes while the battle raged around them. The storage facility was massive, containing dozens of ships that dwarfed anything David had seen in the modern fleet. These were the legendary Imperial dreadnoughts, built during humanity's golden age when they ruled half the galaxy. As David approached the nearest vessel, its hull began to glow with the same light he'd seen from the prison scanner and the ancient armor. Symbols appeared on its surface, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Welcome aboard, Your Imperial Majesty," a voice said as the ship's systems came online. "All Imperial dreadnoughts are now at your command." Throughout the storage facility, dozens of massive warships began powering up. Their weapon systems, dormant for 2 millennia, hummed with barely contained energy. David felt a connection to each vessel, as if they were extensions of his own will. "This is impossible," breathed Commander Park. "The power requirements alone should have drained our entire grid." "These ships don't use normal power," David realized, somehow understanding systems he'd never studied. "They tap directly into hyperspace itself. That's why the Empire was so powerful. They had unlimited energy." The tide of battle turned the moment the dreadnoughts entered the fight. Their weapons cut through enemy shields like they weren't there, and their hulls absorbed damage that should have destroyed them. But victory came at a terrible cost. David watched helplessly as Admiral Stone's flagship took a direct hit from a hegemony superweapon, breaking apart in a brilliant flash that left nothing but debris. Tyler's voice crackled through the communication system from another ship. "Stone is gone, David. She died holding the line so the evacuation ships could escape." David felt something break inside him. These people had given everything to protect him, to preserve humanity's future, and now they were dying because of choices he'd made. The anger that had been building inside him for weeks finally erupted. "All hegemony vessels," he broadcast on an open channel, his voice carrying across the battlefield. This is David Carter, rightful heir to the human empire. You have exactly 1 minute to cease fire and withdraw from this system, or I will show you why your ancestors feared us. The enemy commander's response came immediately. We do not negotiate with pretenders and terrorists. Surrender now, or we will glass every human world in the galaxy. David closed his eyes and felt the power of the ancient fleet flowing through him. So be it. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration. The Imperial dreadnoughts moved as one, their weapons firing in perfect coordination. Enemy ships that had seemed invincible moments before simply vanished under the assault. Within 20 minutes, the hegemony fleet was in full retreat, leaving behind the wreckage of half their vessels. But as the smoke cleared and the casualties were counted, David faced the hardest decision of his life. The surviving Imperial commanders expected him to press the advantage, to reclaim the galaxy by force as his ancestors had. Some human colonial representatives, finally convinced of his legitimacy, were ready to kneel and offer their worlds to the reborn empire. You have the power to rule them all, Tyler said as they stood in the ruins of the command center. The galaxy will bow to you or burn. Isn't that what you want? David looked out at the stars, thinking of Admiral Stone and all the others who had died believing in him. No, he said finally. That's not what I want at all. The negotiations that followed surprised everyone. Instead of demanding submission, David proposed something that had never been tried before, a true partnership between species. The Human Federation would be democratic, with David serving not as an emperor but as a protector, using his genetic abilities and the ancient technology to defend rather than conquer. The Hegemony Council, faced with the reality of humanity's returned power, agreed to the Treaty of Haven. Humans would have equal representation in galactic government, trade restrictions would be lifted, and the persecution of human colonies would end. You could have ruled everything, Tyler said as they watched the signing ceremony on the restored Haven station. Why give that up? David smiled, thinking of the smuggler he used to be and the man he'd become. Because ruling through fear is what destroyed the First Empire. This time we're going to try something different. This time we're going to earn our place in the galaxy. The prison blood test that had started everything seemed like a lifetime ago. David Carter had discovered he was royalty, but more importantly, he'd learned that true leadership meant choosing service over power. Humanity had returned to the stars not as conquerors, but as partners in building a better future for everyone.